Doesn't look like Washington is anywhere near done in the transfer portal.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Just quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you're getting this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that might be, please make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you never miss when we post new show. Plus, if you're on the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the show out a lot. Now, I got a really fun show coming at all you everydayers out there on this Thursday. I want to talk about Jedd Fisch's team building strategy. We got a chance to talk to him on Wednesday, and he had a lot of very, very interesting things to say about the transfer portal versus high school recruiting, money allocation, things like that. I can't wait to dissect that. Talking about money allocation, he also announced that Ryan Walters has been signed to a contract extension. I want to dive into the details, what that means for Washington. However, the big news, as I'm sure all of you are wondering, what the rest of Washington's transfer portal strategy is going to look like. Jedd was very open and honest, said they're up to 9 transfer portal additions after walk-on kicker Hunter McCree, from Eastern Washington is going to be joining after Ethan Michalski opted to enter the transfer portal for his final year of eligibility. So this is really interesting because Jedd Fisch said, again, 6 more guys are going to be coming in, and they're going to be hosting 4 or 5 official visitors over the next couple of days. And I'm curious to see what that's going to look like. Obviously, we're going to have all the latest for you right here on Locked On Huskies, which is one of many, many reasons you need to make sure you hit that subscribe button. But this is something where a lot of this comes down to what's that going to look like. Because on yesterday's show, as you everydayers know, I was sitting here talking like, hey, 3, maybe 4 more guys. We'll see what that's going to look like. And now that we know that there are going to be 6 more additions, I'm very, very curious because there are a lot of different ways that Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff can make this work, where one position that he mentioned right off the bat was going out and potentially adding another Kai Horton style of quarterback to just come in and compete for the backup job behind Demond Williams with Derek Zammit, incoming true freshman, former 4-star recruit, and then redshirt freshman Treston Keeney-McMillan and Dash Byerly. So I think that's really interesting. I'm not necessarily shocked that is the route that Jedd Fisch wants to go. It's something we floated on this show a couple of times, I think, over the last few weeks with all the portal discussions as something that was certainly a possibility. And to hear Jedd do that is certainly an interesting strategy, where before Demond Williams departed, I had a feeling that Hassan Longstreet might have wound up being the guy that Washington wanted to go with at the quarterback position. Obviously, that didn't come to fruition because Demond returns, Hassan Longstreet signs with LSU. So, that just is what it is at this point in time. But when I look at the other 5 additions, I've highlighted 2 major positions as I was talking with some of my wonderful friends in the media about what this could look like with 6 more additions, because you look at it, and maybe that includes a walk-on where Hunter Solwald enters the transfer portal as well. So maybe Washington wants to go out and add a preferred walk-on like Hunter McKee at long snapper as well. That remains to be seen. However, you look at 4 of these positions, and I think it's very clear, very cut and dry, that 2 of them should be allocated to defensive line. 2 of them should be allocated to wide receiver. Because with the amount of bodies that you're losing at wide receiver, now that we've seen a 4th guy enter the transfer portal in Kevin Green Jr., there's just so much that needs to be replaced in that room, because you're not just losing those guys in the portal. Obviously, Denzel Boston to the NFL draft, Omari Evans to graduation / the draft as well. You need to go out and find some guys that can come in and compete at that position. And if they get beat out by true freshmen, so be it. That's fine. At least you went out and you allocated those resources to that position, and you said, we did everything in our power to help Demond Williams. And we've talked about some of the guys that could be possibilities there. Christian Moss at Kennesaw State being one of the names that stands out after a 247 sports report the other night. I look at this position though, and whatever that winds up looking like, I want to see more talent brought in, because I love the talent in the room. Let me be very, very clear about that. The talent that Washington has at wide receiver is extremely exciting. whoever you believe that top guy could be. I've seen some everydayers in the comments saying, hey, I believe Jordan Clay is going to be that guy who comes in and competes right away. Other people have said, hey, I think it's going to be Trez Davis. People have said, Mason James or Chris Lawson is going to be that guy that takes a big step forward. Desmond Roebuck is going to continue growing. Whoever that person that you believe it might be, that's great. That's awesome. And if they do end up being that number one wide receiver, of course this coaching staff is going to be happy with that, right? If they come in and they put up all that production. Me personally, I talked a lot about Justice Williams on yesterday's show, as you everydayers know. However, the guys in the room right now don't have enough experience to elevate this offense and this program to where it needs to be in 2026. And I don't mean that to slight those guys. It's just what it is because of the numbers when you look at the production from that room, and you need more. If you're Jedd Fisch, you're Kevin Cummings, you need to go out and find more production at that position. And I think this coaching staff can absolutely go out there and do that. And it's just a matter of what's that going to look like. And the other position in that regard, and I just kind of wanted to give a brief overview of these without getting into too many specifics, because as you everydayers know, we spent the majority of the week on that. And it was just refreshing to hear that validated by Jedd Fisch, is that Washington is not done. We in the media, as the 3, 4, 5 of us, whoever it was that all talked about this, came to the conclusion that 2 of these spots need to be left open for the defensive line. And now I've talked about a target that I really like, an Enow Etta from Michigan. We also mentioned Louisville edge rusher CJ May, somebody who was very close in terms of where Washington was sitting in his recruitment before he chose Louisville. Those would be 2 guys that I would be really intrigued by. There are several other names that are still hitting the transfer portal, that might still enter the transfer portal. So I don't know if Washington is necessarily done in that regard either. And with 4 or 5 visitors coming on campus, I feel like a couple of them will wind up being defensive linemen. So again, there's just so much to keep an eye on right now at that position with what Washington is looking for, what Washington needs to really compete and really take a step forward in the Big Ten. And that's where I've just identified where the majority of resources need to be spent. And I'm not just saying that I'm the only one that's done that, because a lot of fans out there on Twitter have been absolutely echoing that same point, because that is what Washington needs to compete. Jedd spent a lot of time, and I'm going to talk about this later, talking about continuity and the guys that this program has re-signed, like the offensive line, John Mills, Chantilly Aaliyah, being a couple of very important names there. Zadrius Rainey-Saleh, this entire linebacker core, Ryland Dillard-Allen, Alex McLaughlin, Rashawn Clark, Dylan Robinson, that this program has done a really good job of going out there and acquiring high-end talent through whatever it be, high school recruiting, the transfer portal, and keeping those guys around, keeping them in the building, and then supplementing that with guys through the transfer portal, which is great. And that's a great way to strategize and build a roster. And I mentioned all those guys because there's still one outstanding spot. And I don't think that it's very clear what that is going to be. I mentioned the name Vander Plug on this show the other day, and that was a name I brought up in conversation with some other members of the media, and they're like, really? That'd be 8 tight ends in the room. And I agree that it would be a lot. Maybe we see somebody enter the portal and all of a sudden it makes it a little easier. Maybe the coaching staff is planning on something like that at tight end. Maybe you want to bring in another linebacker because you've lost 2. You want to replenish that with one more guy. Who knows? There are several other ways they can make this work. Maybe defensive line and edge are separate in this discussion, and it's going to be 2 defensive tackles and 1 outside linebacker edge rusher kind of guy. There are so many different ways that Washington can find a way to make this work, and I'm very intrigued to see what that's going to look like, because it's very clear that this coaching staff understands what needs to be done. When you go out and you get a top flight tackle in the transfer portal to compete with Cody Green along the offensive line, you've gone out and you've acquired some guys who can absolutely play in your rotation along the defensive line in Logan George, Kai McClendon, Darren Conley, and Deshaun Watts. That's all really, really solid. Emmanuel Karnley is going to be exactly what you're looking for at cornerback. Jaden Lamar is a perfect fit at running back for 1 year. What you've done so far in the transfer portal is great, and it's a big step in the right direction, but it's not enough. And we need to see more, because for a guy like Ryan Walters to operate, he needs as much talent as possible, but it's so great to hear that he is going to be staying on Montlake. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time. There's nothing like college football season, tailgates, packed stadiums, and being right there in the middle of it all. The energy, the bands, the moments you remember forever. But actually getting tickets, that part used to be frustrating with long queues, logins, and prices jumping at checkout. That's why Game Time gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to unlock amazing college football tickets and experiences in just a few taps. The app is incredibly easy to use. I went from browsing to buying tickets in just minutes. I love being able to see the view from my seat before buying, so I knew exactly what I was getting. The zone deals stood out. You pick the section, Game Time picks the seats, and you save even more. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. We've also got a message from our good friends over at the Space Needle. After 4 p.m., the Space Needle's Pint and a Pie gives you the whole package. Entry, a savory or sweet tip-top pie, and a pint of beer, wine, or a non-alcoholic drink, all for just $35 per person. Minimum purchase of 2 required. Space Needle is Seattle's most iconic destination, not just for the views, but for evening fun. Rather than trying to cram into a crowded sports bar right before, why not enjoy a little space and a great view while pre-gaming with your favorite cocktail? Create a pre-game story as iconic as the Space Needle itself. Look out over the city, look down at Climate Pledge Arena before you go inside. Only $35 per person. Limited time offer, 21 plus only, ID required. Get tickets at spaceneedle.com. Minimum 2 required. So as we move right along here, I'm really excited to talk about Ryan Walters. This is something that I tried to hint at the other day, where there had been rumblings that there were going to be several extensions given out for this staff. And Ryan Walters is the first one that at least Jedd Fisch publicly announces has gotten done. We'll see what public contract numbers look like in terms of figures. From what I've told, he's going to be very, very well compensated, and rightfully so. Because when you look at these numbers that his defense posted in 2025, it was incredibly impressive. His unit didn't allow a team to score more than 26 points in any game this season for 18.7 points per game. That's good for number 5 in the Big Ten and number 15 nationally. 100.8 rushing yards per game allowed. The biggest issue that Washington had in 2024, Ryan Walters really flipped that around in 2025. That was good for 3rd in the Big Ten and number 12 nationally, 311.4 yards allowed per game. That's number 5 in the Big Ten and number 21 nationally. I wanted to rattle off all those numbers because it's very clear that Ryan Walters is one of the nation's best defensive coordinators. And Jedd Fisch has said that ad nauseum since he arrived at Washington. And obviously it's one thing when a coach says that to back their guy, right? But since the moment Ryan Walters got here, he has been able to prove that in several different ways. And one thing that I know we've referenced several times on this show, but it's absolutely worth coming back around to, is the fact that he changed his scheme philosophically to fit this personnel grouping even better in 2025, where he came in here and he loved to run that 5 down front with 1 true inside linebacker and a nickel personnel on the back end. We still saw a whole lot of nickel. We still saw some of that 5 down, but it just didn't work very well. The one play that I like to point to in that case is the second play of the Rutgers game when Antoine Raymond broke off a 56-yard run. And from that point on, I believe Rutgers averaged 2.3 yards per carry on the night when you remove that one play. So that was a really nice night for Washington's defense, and we saw that throughout the year. And to win in this conference, you need to have an elite defense. And holding on to Ryan Walters, when we heard about the Tennessee rumors, we heard Ryan Walters talk about that and say, I haven't had any contact with them. I hope to be here. I'd like to be here. And the fact that we've seen Washington's athletic department and Jedd Fisch and everybody else follow through on that is great. That's really important because the continuity that Jedd talked about that we'll get to a little bit later on the player side of things is great, but sticking with that with coaches as well is incredibly important. And with someone who is just as good as Ryan Walters, and we've seen that at several stops now, his defenses at Purdue just were I don't want to say the beneficiaries, but they were really just spurned with a whole lot of bad luck based on offenses that couldn't move the ball and they had to be on the field for 40 plus minutes a game at different points in time. Ryan Walters has had tremendous defenses at every stop. And the fact that he is sitting up there saying, hey, yeah, from year 1 to year 2, my teams always take a massive jump on that side of the ball. I feel like it's well within expectations for all these numbers that I listed off, top 3, top 5 in the Big Ten, top 20, top 25 nationally, to continue to improve as Washington has retooled the defensive line. And there still need to be more bodies added there. Let me be very clear about that. But I look at the secondary and I look at what Ryland Dillard-Allen and Alex McLaughlin give you at safety and how those guys fit into what's going to go on, plus adding in a guy like Gavin Day and how he can change this with CJ Christian, who is someone I was really impressed by before he suffered the turf toe injury that cost him his season. Washington has so much talent on the back end that is really going to help this defense. And that goes double on the outside with Dylan Robinson and Emmanuel Karnley as your two outside corners. Rashawn Clark is not going to be able to practice this spring as he had shoulder surgery, according to Jedd Fisch, after the LA Bowl. But either way, you're bringing back 4 of your 5 starters in the secondary, or 4 guys who have started games. I know Ryland wasn't a full-time starter, and someone who started all of last season at the Power 4 level at Virginia in Emmanuel Karnley, who just fits this scheme really, really well and already has a great relationship with Jedd Fisch, with John Richardson, going back to their time at Arizona. And all of that is so important in this because so much of what Ryan Walters' defense is predicated on is good secondary players who can come up, defend the run, and tackle. And obviously, we saw what Alex McLaughlin could do in that regard last season. I wouldn't be surprised if he's a preseason all Big Ten first or second team honoree in 2026 because he was that good this past season. And getting him back for another year in this scheme is a really exciting thought. And Emmanuel Karnley, again, somebody who can come downhill and tackle. I love what he brings to the table and how he fits everything that Washington is going to want to do. And it's why I've made some suggestions over the last month or so, as you everydayers know, of Ryan Walters potentially trying to get back to more of his 5 down front that he likes, which is why I wanted to talk about potentially adding 2 more defensive linemen to this room, because you need the personnel and the bodies to be able to make that work. But all these guys on the outside are just as important, because if a running back is able to break contain and get to the edge, you need somebody who can tackle in space in one-on-ones. And I believe both these corners and Rashawn Clark as well in the nickel can all do that exceptionally well. And that's a really exciting thought. And then you come down a level and you look at linebacker. I've said it before and I'm going to say it again. I believe this linebacker group is going to be one of the best in the country in 2026. It was really great to hear Jedd Fisch talking about Buda Alukta and the plans that they have for him, even though I don't expect him to practice during spring ball after suffering the torn ACL. But you add that guy on top of Zedris Rainey-Saleh and Jacob Manu and X-Ray Alexander. And it's worth noting that it seems like some of those guys are going to get some reps at outside linebacker as well, and potentially be edge setters, pass rushers, which is something that Zedris Rainey-Saleh especially excelled at in high school. And you add somebody like Ramzak Fruin to that mix as well. I'm very curious to see what Donovan Robinson is going to be able to give you during spring and fall camp, because this group is deep enough as it is. And if you're able to add some of those guys to that mix as well, and especially when you just remember the comments that Matt Doherty made on the show about Ramzak Fruin and how they believe that it's going to be very hard to keep him off the field early on in his career, all of that is going to function at such a high level, and that's going to continue to improve this run defense, in my opinion, as long as the defensive tackles can hold strong at the point of attack. And with guys like Jacob Manu and Zedris and Alex McLaughlin coming in to clean that up, I think that this run defense can continue to improve and can continue to be one of the best in the Big Ten. And I'm really excited to see what that's going to look like. The biggest question I have, and now there really are no excuses for Ryan Walters as he continues to retool this defense with not just the transfer portal guys, but some of these freshmen like T.I. Mukais and Derek Coleman-Brusa and J.D. Hill. With all of those guys coming in, it is now on Ryan Walters more than ever to figure out a way to rush the passer. However that may be, the 24 sacks is the one area of this defense that you can look at from last season and say that needs to improve in a major way. I think Washington was solid in the turnover department. They weren't necessarily elite, but there are no complaints coming from me in that regard, because they did a good job of getting takeaways and creating short fields and different things like that. But if you can do that in the sack department as well and just continually put teams behind the sticks, which was a major issue this past season with 24, which was tied for 11th in the Big Ten, which I think I've said it on every show this week, and I'm going to do it again, is not good enough in this conference. It's just not. And as this unit continues to grow and continues to improve and continues to get better, it's really exciting to look at all the talent that you have on this roster because I believe it's there at every single level of the defense. But when I look at the interior of the defensive line, after losing so many guys between graduation and the transfer portal, and now it's been confirmed by Jedd Fisch that Zach Durfee will not be returning for the 2026 season. It looks like he'll be off to his pro day, the NFL Combine maybe, and everything like that to see what's next in his career. It is more important than ever to try to find as many avenues as possible to get after the quarterback. And I think that the only feasible way for this program to do that is by going out and adding at least 2 more bodies along the interior of the defensive line to make that happen, and potentially even a third when we talk about those 6 available scholarship spots that we did a little bit earlier, because the more pressure that you can create, the better that Ryan Walters' defense is going to be able to function and get more turnovers on the back end and everything. And I think this defense is sitting in a really great spot, and it's so exciting to hear that Ryan Walters has been extended, but there's still another level that this program can get up to. And if you improve the pass rush, I'm ecstatic to see what that might look like. And Jedd Fisch was also very excited when talking about the continuity that his program is going to see in 2026 in terms of re-signing 61 players. But let's talk about his transfer portal strategy. So listening to Jedd Fisch talk about the transfer portal on Wednesday was very interesting because he said, and as he has just affirmed since he first got here, that he does not want to build a team through, as he calls it, free agency. And I think that's very fair because you look at just how difficult it can be to go out and just keep continuity and culture and all sorts of different things. And even going out and getting players who are going to be high-end contributors on a regular basis for what markets are going to be, as he called it, with some teams that are just absolutely going off the deep end in terms of spending. When you look at what Texas Tech does every year, I'm sure that's the example he was trying to make without calling somebody else out. I think that all of that is very fair. Because on one hand, yes, you want to build as much of your roster through high school recruiting as you possibly can. However, the portal will always, and I think this is how Jedd Fisch will understand it as well. And he talked about it as such, where the portal is there to supplement what you already have. And Washington does have some nice talent that they're getting in through the transfer portal. Emmanuel Karnley being a really nice addition. Hopefully we see a couple more wide receivers, some more defensive line, everything like that. But you look at the talent that they have brought into the transfer portal, and they all fill needs. And they all are very talented players who fill those needs very nicely in one way or another. Some of them have proven a little bit more than others, I would say. Some of them have plenty of upside, but were hurt, like Logan George, for example. And adding those players at major positions of need is great. But I think the point that he's trying to make more so than anything else is that you don't want to get in a habit of doing that, because looking at the biggest thing that Washington has needed for the past couple of years, outside of going out and getting a quarterback, and we saw what that was going to look like for just a couple of days here, was depth on the lines, especially along the defensive line. It is so hard to go out there and find guys that can contribute at a high rate that are going to be somewhat sensible in terms of cost. Because if you go out there and you're paying $2-3 million for each one of these guys, that's going to add up really quickly for pretty much every program in the country outside of like 2 or 3. And I feel that, with the proper amount of donor buy-in and everything, Washington is a program that can absolutely make that work. But I feel that around college football, with the way that things have gone during the transfer portal cycle, with so many guys choosing to enter their names in the portal, that there is just going to be donor fatigue, not necessarily just at Washington, but around the world of college football as well. And some of Jedd's comments definitely pointed to that. And when you look at a position like wide receiver, it is really exciting to talk about some of the young guys that you have on the roster. And it's also really important to go in and help those guys out in terms of getting someone to replace a Denzel Boston for one season, or getting somebody to help out a Desmond Roebuck, who Jedd Fisch talked about a few times, being a freshman All-American, as someone who can be a major building block for this roster and really help things out. All of that is great, but there kind of has to be a point here where I look at just how Jedd is going about this, and there's only one route you can take, right? Because there are two things that can be true with a lot of these programs, where some programs are going to say, all right, we want to do as much as we can through high school recruiting and not rely on the portal at all, like Dabo Swinney. And there are going to be other programs like Texas Tech where we're just going to churn in as many guys at certain positions as possible through the transfer portal and try to supplement through high school recruiting. Both avenues have their pluses and their minuses. And I think that the way Jedd Fisch is going about it, when you look at the overall 10,000 foot view of it, is solid. It's the right way to do it, because since he's gotten here, one message has remained extremely consistent. Several messages have, but I think that this one more so rings true because roster construction is always going to be one of the most important things in college football. And that is, he is going to find a way to play his young guys. He's said that. He's held true to that. Where you look around this roster, how many of these guys that came in as true freshmen with him from Arizona in 2024 played in all those games, played a lot in 2025? How many true freshmen that we saw from this 25 class playing every game this past season? They have absolutely held true to that. Most of those guys have stayed here, where Adam Muhammad, Braden Feinsbright being the two big examples, I would say, of guys that did go elsewhere. Either way, the majority of the players that Washington wants to build around are here, and you are retaining them. And that is good. That is a positive. That doesn't mean that you don't go out and add more players. And again, I think that Jedd Fisch does understand that, but this is kind of where it just becomes a bit of a confusing situation to talk about at times, I would say, because of course you want to hear that. Of course you want to say, hey, we're building around all these really talented players. And it's great because, I mean, that's the way college football should be, right? You shouldn't have to worry about every single player entering the transfer portal every single season, losing all those guys. That's ridiculous. It's frustrating. And knowing that Dylan Robinson, Ryland Durden, Zadrius Rennie-Saleh on defense are all guys that are going to be back to build around. Right? Rashawn Clark, let's throw him into that ballpark as well, since he's a redshirt freshman. It's great that all of those guys are going to be building blocks for this team in 2026. You look on the offensive side of the ball, Damon Williams is back. Great. Desmond Roebuck is another really talented prospect. Chris Lawson at wide receiver, Jordan Washington at running back. All of these young guys, John Mills, Champ Tulialia, a couple other ones. All of those guys, it's great that you have them and you don't want to recruit over them. And Jedd Fisch made that point when talking about linebacker, talking about Dylan Robinson, saying, why am I going to go out and get a second high profile cornerback, even though, he might be better right now than just take our lumps with Dylan Robinson. And he's going to be way better is also the way that he put it. I say take lumps in terms of full-time starter for a full season for the second year of his career. There are a lot of things that you can look at on both sides of this coin and say, all right, well, there's something to nitpick here. There's something to nitpick there. And this is just how I looked at this situation, where when Jedd says he's going to play his young guys, he absolutely does that. And if you don't want to see these things continue, there is only a certain level of transfer portal reliance that you can have. In terms of, I don't like seeing this true freshman who played in 9 or 10 games at Washington this year enter the transfer portal because he was unhappy with this, or he wants this, or he wants that. I think that the best way to make sure that doesn't happen is take your lumps with some of these guys. And it is important to recruit over a, 4-star true freshman like T.I.U. Mukais at defensive tackle, because that is just such a physically demanding position that you don't know what that's going to look like. And if he comes in and he beats out, I don't know, like a 4th or 5th year senior, great. Nobody's going to care, because that's going to be awesome. And you want to see what that guy looks like in the Big Ten if he is already up to snuff physically and mentally with his pass rush plan and all these other things that make him such a highly coveted advanced prospect. Of course, you're going to be happy with all that sort of stuff, but you also need to make sure that you have depth at those positions. And that's where I just want to see a little bit more from this coaching staff over these next couple of weeks, I would say, where it doesn't look like most of these guys that Washington is going to be recruiting are going to be able to enroll until the spring quarter, in early March, when that kind of starts up. So there's a lot to look at here, but I think that because I've seen a lot of outrage from fans saying, well, I want this, I want this, I want that. And I think a lot of these arguments from one side or another are fair. It's, hey, I do want to make sure that we can rely on a Jordan Clay at wide receiver if I'm Kevin Cummings. But at the same point in time, if somebody who I talked about a lot on the show, Reed Harris, is saying, hey, I want to come to Washington, you find a way to make that happen, because you want to be able to, yes, trust Jordan Clay and find ways to get him on the field. And at the same point, you need to find a way to make sure that you are putting yourself in the best position to win on a year in, year out basis. And that is one thing that the transfer portal will absolutely do for you. And we've seen that come through very well for Washington in different points, where Alex McLaughlin is a great example of how the transfer portal can work out very well for you. Jacob Manu in 2026 should certainly be another one in that regard. So it's a really interesting discussion when you just sit down and dissect, all right, well, this is good about the portal. I don't like this angle of it. This is great, but what does it do for these freshmen and so on and so forth? And when Jedd Fisch sits there and talks about retaining players and all of these other things that go into building a roster in the year 2026 with, oh yeah, we're bringing back 61 players. That is great. You're bringing in 25 more from the ranks of high school. That is great. That's awesome. Of course, those are things that you can get excited about and things that you want to have happen as this continues. But at the same point in time, you need to find more ways to use the transfer portal effectively. And when I look at this particular class, it's not going to be rated very highly. We've seen it 64, 65, whatever it is right now on 247 Sports. But when you look at the positions, and if these guys come in the spring and they show, again, that they are ready to handle the Big Ten physically, and they are able to step right in the middle of this defense, when I think about these defensive tackles, I think all of that is a positive at the end of the day, because, again, with the way that Jedd Fisch's philosophy is on these young guys, if Derek Coleman-Brusa comes in and it's very clear that he's the best edge rusher that you have in the room, ahead of Jacob Lane and Logan George and whoever else, Russell Davis, Isaiah Ward, whoever else it might be, great. You're going to be more than happy with that, because that dude is going to help elevate your program. And at the same point in time, you don't want to always have to bring in somebody who's, oh yeah, we're paying 1.5 million, we're paying 2 million for this edge rusher, and that's going to keep Derek Coleman-Brusa off the field right now, because it's a whole separate discussion about coaching malpractice and what the issue would be with something like that, right? But I just wanted to throw all those examples out there at you, because there's so much flying around with what portal recruiting is, what's going on with all this. And the more I sit there and I look at it, the more I think that there is a lot to like about the way that Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff are going about it. And it might be frustrating when you see big names come off the board to one school or another, and it's not Washington. Washington wasn't in the mix for one reason or another. And at certain positions, I absolutely understand that. I'm absolutely right there with you in that regard. When it's, oh man, I wish that Washington was able to secure this high-end defensive tackle who looks like he's going to be a major disruptor wherever he winds up, and so on and so forth. Wide receiver, the same thing. That's why I wanted to mention Reed Harris. But there are so many other positions where Washington is sitting there right now, and I think this roster is in a really good spot. And I'm excited to see what it's going to look like, because when we get out there for spring practice, I think that there are going to be several positions where we just see really stiff competition. And with the way things looked last year, if these guys do continue to grow and mature and step up to the challenge, I'm excited for what Washington might be able to do in 2026, but we'll see, because there are still a couple more additions that need to be made before we can talk about what the goals absolutely need to be in 2026. But until then, thanks for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. If you like what we have to offer here on Locked On Huskies, please make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click the little bell, so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll talk to you on Friday.